Hello everyone, my name is Greg Stagger, and for the next couple of hours I'll be your host in this JavaScript workshop. I want to thank you all for spending this time with me, and hopefully we're going to help you get started using JavaScript in your Captivate projects. It really is a lot of fun and just opens up so many possibilities that you never thought were possible. And so I've broken this workshop down into two main parts. In the first part, we're going to go through and learn some of the language, learn how to use that in Captivate to create some magic and to put those things together. I'll share with you some of the strategies I have for troubleshooting during the development process when I'm running into issues, so that you know how to do that. And then in the second part, we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to put together a project using JavaScript, and it's going to be a addition math facts. It's going to be a timed activity, so you have 60 seconds to answer as many as you can in that time, and then when time is up, you're all done. And so we can start a new game after that. So everything's going to be randomized and interesting, and we're going to use JavaScript to pull it all off. So again, thank you for spending this time with me. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so as we get started here, you'll see I've got a brand new Adobe Captivate window up here, and hopefully you know that this is a workshop. So our goal was to have everybody sort of working at the exact same time, working through the examples so that you're getting the hands-on of typing in these JavaScript commands and performing the work on your own computers. Not meant to be sit and get. You're welcome to sit and get and absorb as much as you want, but you'll get the most out of this by following along on a computer where you can actually work in Captivate at the same time. So we're just going to go ahead and start with a blank slate here. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll hit that. Doesn't matter what the size of the canvas is. We're just going to go ahead and make something. And I'm going to get rid of this default placeholder thing that's there. So that's it, blank slate. We want to do some JavaScript to perform various actions. And we're going to start out taking a look at this language and several of the commands that we have available to us with JavaScript here. So in your workshop downloads, you should have noticed that you have a JavaScript quick reference guide here. And this will show you several of the common commands and ones that are very used a lot. They're very useful in many ways. There's a whole bunch that are specific to Captivate, and then there are some that are not specific to Captivate that work just in general with JavaScript. So there's 5 pages of different commands here and a little bit of an explanation of what that command does and perhaps a little bit about how to properly set it up if appropriate. So have this at your side as well, so that you can use this as a reference and as a guide, or in case you miss something that I happen to say, you can refer back to this. Now a quick note though, you'll notice in green there is certain text, and then in yellow there is certain text. The yellow is expected that we change that information. So in this case, I maybe want to show an object on the stage. So I'm going to say cp.show. I got my opening parenthesis, my opening quote. Then I'm going to place the name of the object I want to show. So naming is very important. We have to know what the names are so that Captivate and your browser ultimately can display the objects that you want using a show command. And then we're going to close out our quote, close out our parentheses, and then we always end with a semicolon. The green stuff doesn't change. That has to be there in order for this to work. That's part of the syntax. But we are going to need to put in whatever the name of the object is here. So this is the part that changes, anything that's in yellow. And so what we'll do here in this first part, I want to go through just real informally, talk about all these different commands and create just some basic scenarios on the stage so that you can see how they work, so that you can practice typing in these commands. If we bump into troubleshooting things, sometimes that happens. We fat fingered the keyboard, we type something wrong, and so it ends up not working. We might get a chance to see some of those kinds of things as well. And so let's go ahead and hop back over to our stage here in Captivate. And if we start towards the top of that document, we're looking at showing and hiding things on our stage. So in order to execute our JavaScript, we need some kind of an event to happen. That can be when we enter the stage. It could be when we click on a button. And that's going to be probably one that's pretty common. So let's go ahead and just create a button. We'll grab a shape here. We'll take a little rectangle, and that's going to serve as our button. So once I've got that made, I'm going to click on this checkbox over on the right hand side to use it as a button. And I am going to go somewhat fast through some of these other types of things. JavaScript is going to be the focus, so I'm not showing how to necessarily use a lot of these other functions, so I'm going to go kind of quickly through those. So we've got the document as well to sort of help again if you fall behind a little bit, but I'll try not to go too fast. All right, so we're going to go ahead and use that as a button. And well, we need something on our stage that we're going to show or hide. So let's go ahead and make another shape. We'll just reach up here, we'll grab the triangle, and let's put a triangle out here. And just to make it exciting, I'll change the color. So we got a red triangle. And naming is important. So remember, we have to call upon these objects by their names. And as you know, Captivate provides a pretty generic name. It just says, in this case, smartshape_2. Well, that doesn't tell me much. So I'm just going to go ahead and change it. And I'm going to have it say triangle, because that's what it is. I always try to pick names that accurately reflect what it is that we're talking about. So triangle, that's pretty appropriate. Over here, our button, this is just smartshape_1. Well, that's not very good. I want to use this button to hide the triangle. So let's call it hide button. And I just use BTN as a way to sort of abbreviate button. And so I camel case this. So I say the word hide and then capital BTN for button. So hide button. That's a convention I use. You're welcome to use whatever convention you use. The key is you know what the names are so that you can properly refer to them when we use the JavaScript. Okay, so now that I've got my two objects and I've got them named, I want to think about, well, what is it that I want when this button is clicked? What do I want to have happen? Well, I want the triangle to go away. I want it to be hidden. Now, we've said that already, but the point I want to make out here is about something called pseudocode. Pseudocode, where it's not actually the code, but we simply say in a statement, what is it that we need to have happen? And this is a great way to plan the code that you are going to write into your JavaScript window. And I don't want us to get caught up and scared over the word code. I know that that word sort of brings up different feelings amongst everybody, and especially if you're a beginner to it, you've never had any, formal code classes or website classes or anything like that. It doesn't matter. This can be very, very simple because a lot of times it's a straightforward reading of the code that says what we want it to do. And if we can get into this habit of pseudocode, talking through what it is we expect to have happen, that helps us make sure we don't miss any steps when we go through the code. So in this first example, very simply, what do we want to have happen? It's our pseudocode. The triangle will hide or be hidden or disappear. However you want to word that, that's what's going to happen. So again, that's our pseudo code. So I'm going to click on my button, and then over on the right hand side I've got my Actions tab, and on success it says go to the next slide. Well, we're going to change that to say execute JavaScript. This is where all of our JavaScript is going to go for whatever this button is going to do when it's clicked. Now I see here we've got a click box that says continue playing the project. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just uncheck that because I don't want anything to continue playing. I want 100% of what happens on my stage to be event driven. So everything that takes place is a direct result of something the learner does on my screen. Nothing just happens on its own. It's driven by the person who's interacting with our project. So again, this is a preference for my projects. If you need to use that for some reason, go ahead and leave that checked. But for these examples, we want to go ahead and have this unchecked. Now I have a script window button here. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and this brings up our little window where all the JavaScript is going to go, and that's what will run when the button is clicked on. So in here, we're going to start by hiding that triangle. And you can refer to the quick reference that you have, but I'm going to start with CP, say for Captivate, and then I'm going to put a dot CP dot hide. That's what we want to have happen. We want to hide the triangle. Now we have to tell JavaScript what it is that's going to be hidden, and that's where the object name comes in. So whatever you've told it, and that's why if you have a whole bunch of smart shape underscore 1 2 3 4 5, that's not very helpful. But we know we named this triangle, so I'm going to put this in parentheses as well as in quotes. So I open parenthesis, open quote, type the name of my object, which is triangle, and then I'm going to close quote and close parenthesis. Now we have one final thing here, and that is a semicolon, and we're going to plug that in as a way to say this statement is done. And so we have CP hide triangle. So you can see here, just a straightforward reading of that code lets us know that when we click on the button, what's going to happen? We're going to hide the triangle. Well, let's test it and see if it works. So I'll hit OK, and then we'll go preview HTML5 in browser. So we go ahead and open up our browser. There's my button, there's my triangle, and if I click on it, it should hide, and it does. It's gone. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead and come back to our window here, and we're going to add some text to our button now. So we'll call it hide. Well, now that we've hidden it, we probably need a way to get it back. Otherwise, why do we have it on our stage at all? There's a reason that it's hidden. There's a reason we show it under different circumstances. Think about any project you might have. So I'm going to go ahead and select my button, and I'm going to do a Control D. That will duplicate that object. So we see we've got another button that's exactly the same, has the same text. It even has the same code. If I open up my script window, it says CP hide triangle. Well, let's think of our pseudocode. Remember, what is it that we want to have happen when that button is clicked? Well, this one we're going to change. We want to show the triangle. So I want to say cp.show and triangle. We have the name already in there, so I just remove that and we type show. So now we got cp show the triangle and cp hide the triangle. Let's change our text to reflect what's going to happen there. So we were going to hide the triangle and show the triangle. Let's test it. Preview HTML5 in browser. There we hide it, and there we show it. And we can go back and forth, and it repeats as much as the learner needs to achieve the effect that particular activity would ask of them. Okay? So there's the first two in our document. We're showing and hiding objects. Well, next we want to take a look at enabling and disabling. And this often would go towards these buttons. So maybe I hide this triangle, but maybe I want this to be disabled for some reason, that we cannot hide the triangle unless some other condition in our project has been met first. And so this remains disabled until some point in the future. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab this button and I'm just going to hit Control D 2 more times. So now I've got 3 of these show buttons, but I'm just going to spread them out here. And I'm going to change this one to say enable, and I'm going to say this one for disable. So we'll put this function on here. Now, remember our hide button? We want to disable this. We called it hide btn. I'm going to go ahead and name these different here also. This will be our show btn, just so that they're named appropriately. And we'll call this one enable btn, and we'll call this one disable btn. All right. Now, with the enable button, let's go ahead and go to our script window on the right hand side. And when we duplicated it, it also duplicates the code. So we don't want to show the triangle. Remember our pseudocode. What do we want to have happen? We want to disable the hide button. Disable the hide button. So let's get rid of this. And again, you can refer to that quick reference if you need to. But we'll go cp.disable, and then in our parentheses and in our quotes, we're going to disable the hide button. Hide btn, close quote, close parenthesis, semicolon, to end that statement. So again, straightforward reading, cp.disable the hide button. And because I named it the way I did, that really helps us to read that in such a way that we know what's going on. Oh, disable the hide button. Boing, now it's not going to work. Okay, so let's accept that, and let's preview this. So by default, it works. So I can hide the triangle and I can show the triangle. I can hide the triangle and let's disable that button. You know, I didn't put my code. Oh, here's a troubleshooting thing. Here we go. So I've got my enable. I put that on the wrong button. Hopefully some of you caught that before I did. We'll do enable the hide button. Hit OK. But on the disable button, we're going to say cp.disable, and this will be our hide button. All right, so that should work much better for us. Glad you got to see that. Okay, so hide and show still work. Now the triangle is hidden. We're going to disable the hide button. So we'll click our disable. Now it doesn't look like anything happened, but I click disable. When I come up to hide, I don't hear that click sound. So when I show it, I go back to try to hide it, it doesn't work. I have to click a enable button. Now the hide button works again, so when I click it, there it goes. All right, perfect. Disable the button, doesn't hide. Enable the button, now it hides. So we get a chance to see now how that works. And again, whatever your circumstance might be, you have an opportunity to build that functionality in. And right now we're just dealing with single effects. Very easy to also do with a single event action in your drop-down panel on the right. But over time, as we build into our buttons multiple things going on, we start to see the power of that JavaScript really come into play. Let's take a look at the next couple of items in our quick reference here, and that's the idea of navigation. So we want to go backwards and forwards through the project, or we want to jump if it's in a non-linear type of way. We want to be able to get around a little quicker by jumping. So let's take a look at what we can do here. So right now I just have the one slide. Let's go ahead and duplicate our slide and make a couple of more. So we'll go duplicate and duplicate. So now I've got 3 different slides here, but they're all exactly the same. So we need to differentiate these a little bit. So we'll keep the red triangle on slide 1. I'm going to go to slide 2 here, and we'll select our triangle, and let's just change it to a square, and we'll make it blue. So it's a blue square, and instead of this default naming triangle _7, let's call it square. That makes that a little easier. And on the third, let's change that triangle to, let's go to a yellow star. That sounds good. There we go. And we'll call it star instead of triangle _12. Perfect. All right, so now we also want to reflect our buttons a little bit differently here as well. So slide 1 works fine. Slide 2, we've got a square now. So here, my hide button, notice it says hide button _6, because when I duplicated this, it has to have a unique name. So we don't want it, to be the same. Then there's conflicts. But I maybe don't want _6. I want to delineate this somehow. So I'm going to change this from _6 to hide button, and we'll call it we'll say SQ for the square. And then I'll do the same, show button and SQ for the square. This will be enable button, SQ for the square, and then disable, SQ for the square. Now the code on our hide button, this will give you some more practice on changing some things out. We'll go to our Actions tab, go to the script window. We don't want to hide the triangle here. Let's hide the square. So we'll just change this out to say square. We'll hit OK. We'll do the show. And we're going to show the square on this one. Hit OK. Here we're going to enable the hide button SQ. And we're going to disable on this one the hide button SQ. Okay, let's go to the star page, and we'll do hide button ST for star, and we'll do show button ST for star, enable ST, whoops, ST for star, and disable button ST for star. Go ahead and run through this. Hide the star, hit OK, and we'll show this star with this button. Hit OK, and then what we're going to do is enable the hide button ST and disable the hide button ST. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to change this enabling and disabling idea here to be a next and previous button for our slide navigation. So being on slide 1, I don't have a previous slide to go to. So I'm just going to get rid of this, say goodbye. And on this disable button, we're going to say next, because we're going to go to the next slide with this. So let's go to our script window. And again, pseudocode. What do we expect to have happen? We want to go to the next slide. And so, as you might expect here, cp dot go to next slide. And what I want to remember with this particular command is I'm going to add an open and closing parentheses there. Don't have to put anything in it. Just going to put them there like that because it's a function. And so that calls this function to take us to the next slide, whatever's there. Okay, so CP, go to next slide. You see we got some camel casing going on with lowercase, then uppercase, then uppercase, then uppercase as it starts each new word. I'm a big fan of camel casing. I don't like to use any spaces or other symbols in the naming because sometimes, an LMS or website management system kind of thing, I mean, they may not like how these symbols appear in the names. They may not know what to do with them. And so that can break things. So I never use those in my naming conventions. I use this type of camel casing that we see here with the JavaScript command as well. So straightforward reading though. What's going to happen when we click next, our pseudocode? We want to go to the next slide. CP, go to next slide. Let's hit OK. Now if we go to slide 2, let's put back for our previous, and we'll put next in here for our next button. And let's look at the code here. So on the back, just like we did with CP go to next slide, I'm going to do CP dot go to previous slide. Open and close parentheses and a semicolon. That's one of those subtle things you kind of have to remember. Closing with the semicolon. Where do I put parentheses? Where do I put my quote marks? That sort of thing. But again, straightforward reading, go to previous slide. That's what's going to happen there. So we hit OK, and then on our next button, this is going to be CP dot go to next slide. Open and close and semicolon. Finally, on our third slide, I don't have a next slide to go to, so let's get rid of this button. Hit OK, and let's make this one say, I think we put back on that. Let's put back, and we'll take a look at the script window here, and we'll say go to previous slide, open and closing parentheses, semicolon to close that out, and hit OK. So let's test these. Let's see if it does what we expect it to do. Hit preview, HTML5 in browser. So here we've got our slide number 1. We got the red triangle. Hide and show still work. If I go to next, there's my blue square. Hide and show to work for that. Notice I got my other button here. I can go back to the red triangle, go forward to the blue square. Well, that's interesting. I maybe had to change something here on the slow or the show button. Let's go next. There's my yellow star. I can hide that and show that. I can go back to here, which the hide worked, but we maybe forgot to change the square, or we mistyped something because the show button doesn't work. So we can go back to our pseudocode. What do we expect to have happen when we click on the show button for slide 2? Well, we want to see that square show up. So let's go back to here and let's take a peek at that. So here's my show script window. Oh, I put in cp.show and then show instead of square. That's why it didn't work, because the wrong name is there. There is no object on the stage with the name of show. We want to show the square. Okay, so let's test that now and take a look. So hopefully some of you noticed that before I did. And let's go to the next slide. Now I can hide and show, and that square comes back just like we expect it to. So perfect. Okay. So now we have, we see the navigation of going to the next slide where the star is, going previous. Okay, so this is a linear fashion. But what if we don't want to move in a linear way? What if our project has us jumping around to all sorts of different slides in no particular order. Well, then we want to be able to jump to a particular slide. And this particular code is going to look a little different than the ones that we've seen so far, but it's still a fairly easy way to think about it. But it does require us to think a little differently. We're going to talk about something called zero indexing. Let's go to slide 1. And instead of going directly next to slide 2, I want to jump over that and go right to slide number 3. All right, so let's create a new button. So I'm going to duplicate my next button. And let me just change the text to say slide 3 so that we know, right, that's our pseudocode. What's going to happen when we click on this button? What do I need to have happen? I need to go to slide 3. So let's rename this and call it slide 3 button. All right, so on this code here, we'll take a look at it. It says go to next slide right now. So syntax is a little different. We're going to say CP and then capital C MND for command. Capital C, lowercase MND, CP, command, and then go to, and then slide. And here we're going to set a value. So equals some value. If you refer to the quick reference guide, you see how this is called out. That value is in yellow. That means this is the part that changes. This is where we put in where do we want to go. We want to go to slide number 3. And the tricky part is this idea of zero indexing. Our inclination would be to enter the number 3 here and close that out with our semicolon, because over here we have slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, and that makes a lot of sense. That's how most people would do that intuitively. But these are part of an array. These are zero indexed. All the slides in the background somewhere in all the code of Captivate, these have all been registered as part of an array. And arrays are zero indexed. We won't get into that. But know that when I say zero index, it means we start counting with the number 0 instead of starting counting with a number 1. So on our screen, we start counting 1, 2, 3. But on the back end, we start counting 0, 1, 2. So slide 3 is actually number 2 in the array. So what I want to do is actually put number 2 here so that we go to this particular slide. So CP, CMND, go to slide equals 2. Notice there's no dot here. That's important. And again, it's one of those language idiosyncrasies that we have to remember, kind of like putting accents on things. This doesn't have a dot. If you put a CP dot in there, it's not going to work. Just CP, CMND. So let's hit OK and give it a test. Hit preview, HTML5 in browser. So here I got hide and show still work. My next works, but also I got my slide 3. I should see the yellow star, and we do. Very good. So that allowed me to jump to that slide. And just remember that idea of zero indexing. Remember the pseudocode. Because if you always know the pseudocode, what is it that needs to happen when I click this button, that always is going to help you know when things aren't working like you're expecting them to. And it can also give you a leg up on the troubleshooting. All right, so let's take a look at another option here. And this is the idea of changing the state of a particular item. Okay, so let's go back to here. Now we've got our red triangle, we've got our blue square, and we've got our yellow star, but they're all different objects on different slides. So suppose I stay on slide number 1. In fact, let's go ahead and delete slide 2, and let's delete slide 3, So we just have one slide, and we don't need this button, so we can get rid of that too. Delete. All right, so we'll click on our red triangle, and let's just quick make a few states. So we'll go into state view. There's our red triangle, and let's duplicate that state. And you know what? I'll just leave the name. I won't change the name here, but let's create 2 new states, because we're just going to go to the next state. Doesn't matter what the name of it is, we're just going to the next one. But to show that they're different, let's go ahead and make our square, blue square again. And on the 3rd state, we'll go ahead and we'll do the yellow star again. Okay, so we got 3 states. We'll exit out of there. Now by default, this is our normal state that shows here. And we're going to create a couple new actions here. And so for this one, we want to do a previous state. So we want to go get rid of that text there. And so we'll say cp.go to previous state. And now we have to tell JavaScript, well, the previous state of which object. So if I hit my parentheses and my quotes, we want to go to the next previous state, rather, of the triangle. That was the name of our object on the first slide to begin with. So go to the previous state of triangle, and let's hit OK. So let's make this say previous here. There we go. And this one will have, say, next. And on this one, we'll go to our script window. This is going to be cp.go to next state. And the state of what is going to be triangle. There we go. And we'll hit OK. So now, pseudocode, what do I expect to have? Oh, I misspelled previous. Hopefully you caught that before I did. All right. I expect this to go backwards in my lineup. So if I look at my state view, previous, I'm going to go back. Now it's going to cycle around, so I should see the yellow star when I click previous, but when I click next, it should go to the blue square. All right. So pseudocode, go to the yellow star, the previous state. This button, go to the next state, which will be the blue square. Let's test it. All right, so do we see the yellow star? And we do. And if I keep going, I see the blue square and back to the red triangle, and it'll just keep cycling through. Same with next. I'm at the yellow star. Next would be the red triangle, and it is. So good. We know that that's properly working. So you have, this would be a good way to cycle through a bunch of different images, almost like a photo gallery of some kind, where you can just, go back and forth and cycle through all of them. It's linear only in this case, so you're just next or previous, whatever happens to be, it'll be the same order that you have in your state view. But let's take a look at creating a button that says, I want you to change to a specific state. So I got a whole bunch of states, and you need to be a particular one, so they can click on them in any order they want, and it will be that state. So I've got 3 buttons here for 3 states. Let's make each one go to each of the 3 states. So on this previous, let's make this the triangle. On this button, let's do the square. And on this button, let's do the star. So we'll name those so we know what it is they're going to do. So pseudocode, what do I need to have happen when I click this button? I need to change to the triangle. So let's go to our script window. And here, this will be cp.changeState. Notice the camel casing. Now I need two parts here. I need to say what object and what state. So the first part, the first set of quotes, is the object. Change the state of triangle to the name of the particular state. Now, if we go back to our state view, our triangle is called normal. Now maybe we want to do something different than that. So maybe we call it, let's do red. We'll name it red, and we'll close that out. Okay? I'm going to copy this because these are all called triangles. This is the one shape is called triangle, so that part's going to be the same. I'm just going to copy that. We'll go to the square, go to the script window, and what do we expect to have happen? We expect the blue square to show up. So instead of red, let's call it blue. But we're changing the state of the object called triangle. It's going to be a little weird looking at this, isn't it? But you get to see the idea. And we'll paste that in, and this will be the yellow star. We expect to see the yellow star when that happens. Okay, so I got triangle, got yellow, because this object is called triangle. Let's go into the state view because we want to make sure that these have names that match. So let's rename this yellow. Hit OK. Let's rename this one blue. Hit OK. And we're going to duplicate this one and call it red. So that normal state always stays there. Now it doesn't matter what order they're in because they're going to be called up specifically. All right, let's preview it and see what happens. All right, what do I expect to have happen when I click on this? I want to see a square. There it is. I want to see a star. There it is. I want to see the triangle. There it is. It's already a triangle, so it doesn't look like anything happens if I click it again. But that code is always there working to change it how you need it to be changed. All right, so we've taken a look at showing and hiding things, enabling and disabling things. We've looked at changing states. We've looked at navigation things. And so those are a couple of really common functions that you're typically going to want to try to do within Captivate. Okay. Now let's start getting into the idea of using some variables. The variables are going to be important for us to work with when we use JavaScript. Okay. So we'll go back to our practice window here, and let's just go ahead under Project and Variables. Let's create our own variable. So we'll add new, and let's call it my var for my variable, and we'll start with that value being 0. And then we'll save that and go ahead and close that out. Now I've created this variable globally because I want to show it. So what I'm going to do, let's duplicate, no, I'll make a new shape. I'll do a little rounded rectangle. So this is my variable. And so I'm going to do the double dollar signs, my var, just as I wrote it in. It is case sensitive, so make sure you're using exactly as you typed it in the variables window. Okay? So now we're going to do some things here. I want to create a couple of buttons. We're going to do several things at once here. So I'm going to make a up triangle. Let's put that one over here. And let's duplicate that, and we'll move this one to this side. And this will be, let's flip that around this way so it's a down. These are going to be used to increment and decrement the value of the variable. So we'll go up and down with this. And so these are going to be buttons. That's a button. And this one is a button. And so we'll start by executing JavaScript on our down button. We're going to say don't continue playing the project, and we'll go to the script window. Now, pseudocode. What do we expect to happen? We expect the value of my variable to decrease by a value of 1. And a really shortcut way of doing this is just to hit the hit the minus sign twice. So minus, minus, and then my var, and close it. And what that does is it simply reduces the value of my var by a value of 1. And so that's all we expect to have happen when that button is pressed. Likewise, on the up button, we'll execute JavaScript. Don't continue playing, script window, and here to increment by 1, I'm going to say plus plus, and then the name of my variable called my var. So this is one way to work with variables in JavaScript. If when you have the learner is doing things and we want to increase or decrease the value of those variables accordingly, we can have it do this. So it'll just keep on going and going as many times as somebody hits the button, so you can use it as a counter. But let's see how this happens. This double dollar signs rendition of text in here, that will actually display the value of the variable in this window. So let's go ahead and preview this and see that it works. So we assigned it a default value of 0. If we go up, it goes up by 1, and goes down by 1, goes negative also. Okay? So now that we have this variable in place, we can use JavaScript to check this variable before it does anything. Before it does anything. So we could say, we could use these and create some conditional statements now at this point. So we could say, you know, if the variable is 3, then change the triangle. If the variable is, 7, change it to the square. If the variable is 2, change it to the star. You could make it be whatever it is that you want. And it will only work then when that if statement is considered true. So it's going to look at that variable. This is a really powerful way to control what happens in your project based on conditions you need the learner to meet first. So you're setting variables based on what they do. Did they look at this or look at that or complete this or score a certain amount on that? And that all dictates everything else that happens. So we see a way to increment and decrement our variables. All right, let's take a look back here. And let's look at our up button here. And suppose I want my value to go up by something other than 1. I have to say that my variable, every time it's clicked on, is equal to something, let's say by 5. We want to increase by 5. So we say my variable equals my variable plus 5. So when we click on the button, it looks at the value of my variable, which is going to be 0 at first, and so now it's equal to 0 plus 5. So now my variable equals 5. The next time we click on it, my variable equals 5, so my variable again is going to equal 5 plus 5, so then it becomes 10. And so in this way we can increase the variable in a different size. So let's test that and see if that works. So we've got 0 for our value. We increment, it goes to 5, then 10, then 15. So it goes up in values of 5, just like we expect. So now we could play some games with our if statements. We can start creating a conditional thing. All right, so let's look at our code for the triangle. Well, this is what we want to have happen. We want this to change, but we only want it to change under certain conditions. So I'm going to create my if statement. If I say if my variable is equal to, and I use two equal signs here because if I use one equal sign, that's a way of assigning the variable, where we said my variable equals 0. So when I want to compare to check and see if it is 0, then I use two equal signs in that case. So if my variable is equal to 15, since we know we're going up by values of 5, we set that condition is in the parentheses. If this is true, then we have these curly braces. And whatever is in the curly braces, if this is true, all of the stuff that's in between here is going to happen. And in this case, it's going to be change the triangle to the red object, which will be our triangle here. Okay. So let's hit OK there. The square, we could do a similar thing with. So let's say if my variable is equal to 10, put our curly braces in there. We'll jump down and say, then we'll change it to blue. Let's test this much. Let's see if it works. All right, so we said if the variable was equal to 10. Right now it's 0. This is a great troubleshooting tip, folks. I create these little boxes to display all my variables on the screen, and I know if they're not working then. So what do I expect to have happen? Nothing. If I click this, nothing should happen because the variable doesn't equal 10. And nothing happens. It stays a red triangle. But if I change this now so that the variable does equal 10, now when I click on the button, I don't see my blue square. So what happened? Let's go back and take a look. Hopefully you caught something before I did. Oh, I got a space between the I and the F. Look at that. So if I put my space in the wrong spot. So if my variable equals 10. Let's try it now that we fixed our little typo there. Let's hit OK. And preview. Here we go. And now nothing. Change the variable. Equals 10. Now I get my blue square. So you know, this is another great example. I make mistakes just like everybody else does. So the key is when you make them, do you know where to go? Because otherwise it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. But if you're always sort of aware of your pseudocode, of what is supposed to happen, you can usually hone in on the area you need to go. Use your quick reference guide. So I was able to look at that and see that, oh, I basically misspelled it because I had a space in there, so that changes everything. The code is very fussy. One character wrong and things don't go as expected. So that's just a good way. I'm so glad that you're able to see those as we work through this. Now triangle, if I click on this, what should happen? Nothing, because there we said the variable had to equal 15. So nothing happens. Let's make it 15, and there's our red triangle. So perfect. So we see an example of a conditional statement using an if. If, in parentheses, this is true. All right, so we can go back and look at, let's take a look at our document together. Come down here. There's our increment and decrement. And down here on our last page, here we go. So if, go ahead and set your conditions. what criteria needs to be true. If the variable equals 10, do all this. Put your command in here, close it with the semicolon, right? Now we can add on to this. We noticed that when we clicked on the button and the variable wasn't correct, nothing happened because this was false. This only executes if the conditions are true. But what if we want something to happen when it is false? If it's true, do this, but if it's false, do this. And that's where the else comes in. If this is true, do this. If it's not true, otherwise, or else, then do this. Then we create this else statement. Let's make one of those and see how this works. Let's use the blue square as our example. We'll use this button. So if the variable is 10, go ahead and make it blue. But if it isn't, or else, let's put our else statement in here. So we got an open and closing curly brace. Everything in between is what's going to happen if the variable isn't 10. And so let's say, let's go cp.change state, and let's change the state of triangle to the yellow star. We called that yellow, didn't we? All right, so now if the variable is 10, we get a blue square. If the variable isn't 10, then we get the yellow star. Okay, so let's try that and see if it goes. So if I click this right now, what should I expect to have happen? Well, the variable is equal to 0. And this says if it's 10, go to the blue square. But if not, otherwise, if that's false, which it is, show me the yellow star. So I'm going to expect a yellow star here. And that's what we get. So now you have a little bit more of an extension with the variables there and using conditional statements to do different things. All right, I want to take a look at a couple more things that you can use to help you. As you start to build things into your buttons, you can see how this is starting to grow a little bit as we build in conditions. Sometimes it helps to put comments into your code. When it gets big and long, you might want some hints as to what's happening. Or if you give this to somebody else, maybe they're able to look at this and see those comments. So, maybe down here, I put in a comment is always going to start with these 2 slashes going forwards. And then I can say whatever I want, and basically JavaScript ignores that. It doesn't try to execute anything. So you can just put a bunch of gibberish in here to say what's going on, and it won't even be looked at. So here we might want to say, if the variable is not equal to 10. Okay, I mean, we kind of know that already, but in more complex things you might say, okay, this block of code is for this. It's to do this. It's to change these values or that values. This is the purpose of the following code. So you can then hunt through your code and find a little bit quicker some of the things that you maybe want to do. So this is an example of a comment. So you want to keep these to a single line. If I need a new line, then I'm going to just start my new line the same way instead of using a multiple line type of comment. Okay. Another option that is really useful is to enter console logs. And if I add this in here, you'll see this in the quick start guide as well. I can say console.log, and in parentheses I can put a particular message. So let's capitalize that, you have a star, because That's what we changed that to. All right, so anything you put in the quotes here is going to print out as a message in the console, at least whenever you get a star. Okay, so let's hit OK on that. Now, when I go to my preview, this is a really powerful place to visit. You have a developer's tools for troubleshooting. And typically I can go up here to my settings button or something and find where there are some tools. In my browser I got more tools and then developer tools. And here I can go ahead, I'm just going to go ahead and clear those messages out. On my console I can interact with my Captivate project, and this is great for troubleshooting too. So we see right now my variable, my var, is equal to 0. So I can check that. I can type my var in the console and it tells me its current value. I can change my var to equal 10. Now here's the thing, before I hit enter right now, if I hit square, oh, there I got my console log. Oh, I got a star, but I wanted a square. Oh, but I got to have the variable equal to 10 when I do that. So let's go ahead and change my var to 10. Now it says it's equal to 10. I see it changed up here. Now I can get my blue square. So I've got this great way to troubleshoot and kind of check that things are working. I threw that message in there that says I have a star, so I know, oh, it was my else statement that fired when I ran the code instead of what I was expecting something else to go instead. And so then I can send myself little messages like this and use this console as a way to learn more about what my project is doing. And that is so powerful in troubleshooting and figuring things out. And we'll try to make use of that a little bit more as well. When we develop our project, we'll try to see some different ways where we can double check some things and make sure that they're working properly. Let's take a look at how to create some random numbers, because this is one of the things that JavaScript does oh so well, and we don't have this functionality natively within Captivate. So let's take a look, and we'll use the myVar variable in order to do this. I'm just going to take a moment here and get rid of some of these excess windows that we've opened up over time here. All right, thanks for bearing with me on that. And so we want to assign. I've got two buttons here that will change my variable, but we're going to not use these. We're just going to pick a random number. Okay, and I'm going to set this, let's put it on the button though. So my var equals, instead of whatever its value is plus 5, we want this to be a random number. So we're going to start out. This is a math function, so we have math, and that's a capital M. That's really important. And I do math.floor. And when we say .floor, that means we go to the, so if you had a number like, say pi, 3.1415, okay, we just lop off all the decimals, boom, it's a 3. We hit the floor. So whatever it is without decimals, that's our value, math.floor. Because when we pick random numbers, JavaScript will create or pick a random number between 0 and 1, but not including 1. So 0.99999, okay, it'll pick this random decimal value that's somewhere less than 1. And we don't want all those decimals in our random number. We want nice whole numbers to show up. So here's how we do this. We do math.floor of math.random. Okay, so math.random, we're going to put our open and close parentheses because that's a type of function. But so is math.floor. That's why we have that opening parenthesis for that. But what we're going to do is take this random number that's chosen, and let's say we want a random number between 1 and 10. I'm going to multiply that value by 10. So I'm going to take my random number that's generated. Remember, that's something less than 1, between 0 and less than 1. Multiply it by 10. So that'll give me something between basically 0 and 9 point something. Okay, 9.9999. And so we're going to go to the floor with that. That means I will drop the value all the way to 0 or all the way to 9. So this will give me 0 to 9 right now. But if I take and add 1 to that, instead of being 0 to 9, now it's 1 to 10. So I should always get a value between 1 and 10 when I click on this button. Let's test that out. Let's see if that works. Let's preview. All right, so default value was 0. Every time I click this button, I should see a random number between 1 and 10 show up here. There's 10, there's 8, there's 9, there's 1, 1 again, and an 8 and a 7. And so you can kind of see how that works. It's just picking a random number. And that is really, really powerful when you want to create games or just a new experience for the learner each time they come. So they don't memorize the answers because they're always getting something randomized. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to put this into practice when we build our project together. Because remember, we're going to create from scratch a addition math facts little activity where they'll have 60 seconds to answer as many addition problems as they can. And so we want to randomly pick numbers and present them to the learner and let them do the math, get as many as they can, improve that skill as we move on. So that's how we work on making random numbers. A really powerful tool with JavaScript. So that is a quick look at several different common used ideas with JavaScript, some commands that we would put into practice here, and we'll use these when we work on our project next. Hopefully you got a chance to see a bunch of those and you had your laptop available or your computer nearby and you were actually creating these, setting these up, seeing how they work, and getting them to function. And see, this really isn't or doesn't have to be as scary. Straightforward readings of things actually work out pretty well. But remember, it's kind of like learning a language. We got to start with the basics. We got to learn the little things before we move up to the big and the complex things. And this is a great place to start. You can accomplish so much with just this little bit of JavaScript under your belt. So make use of the reference guide, make use of the examples that we've come up with here, and we're going to go ahead and transition now into creating our project. So go ahead and find your downloadable files for this, and let's get going. All right, let's go ahead and get started building our project for today. It's going to be a addition math facts activity where the student has 60 seconds to answer as many addition problems as they possibly can to try to get the best score, the most correct in 60 seconds. And it's a way they can do this as many times as they want to improve their speed at their math facts. And all of the problems that they are faced with are going to be randomly presented. And so it's always going to be different every time that they play. And that's really part of the power of JavaScript in creating these types of experiences for your students, is that ability to randomize all kinds of things. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to make a blank project. Everything is from scratch. We can leave the default 1024 by 627 and hit create. A couple of quick prep items for the stage. One is we're going to get rid of the default play bar. So go to Project Skin Editor, uncheck Show Playback Control, and then go to the middle button here that says Borders and uncheck Show Borders. That'll take care of that part for us. And then we're going to get rid of the placeholder text. I can select this, or I can select it in my timeline and press the Delete button on my keyboard. Now that's gone. Now we have a nice blank slate to work with. Now I'm going to need a bunch of images and that to prep my stage so that we can put that JavaScript to use on something. Now in your workshop downloads, hopefully you've already downloaded the project files. We've got a folder with several images. Let's go to our library. Select this second folder here. When you hover, it says Import. And then go ahead and navigate to the location of your downloads and find that images folder. And we're going to go ahead and Control A so that we select all of the items in the folder, and then hit Open. And we should see a message come up that says 31 items have been successfully imported. Let's confirm that. Now we'll start building our stage with all of the items that we need. We'll start with the background. So let's go ahead and bring that. There's a file called Slate BG for background. So we're going to bring that out. And this is kind of a chalkboard look. This image is a little larger than we need. So in our Properties panel, let's set the location to X0 and Y0. And then set the width to match our stage, which is 1024. That leaves us with a white bar down at the bottom. Don't worry about that. Now let's go back to the library, find the frame only CB for the chalkboard. This will be the frame for the chalkboard. Drag that out. Notice I'm dragging to the scrap area on all these new items, because if I try to drag it out over one of these other images, it's going to try to replace it rather than simply add it to the stage. So if you bring it to the scrap area where it's not touching anything else, we can reduce that problem. So let's go to the Properties panel. We'll set the X and Y to 0, 0, and then set that width to 1024 to match. So now we have a nicely framed in chalkboard look to our stage. Next, in our library, we're looking for a file called Stripe CB. So this is a stripe that's going to go on our chalkboard. I'm going to drag this out to the far side just so we can kind of see what that looks like. It's a nice kind of a blue colored stripe. And what I'm going to do is, it's a little long. I'm going to set this for 850 pixels wide. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to align this to the stage. And we see that puts it at X of 87. I'm going to set this to also be Y of 87. And that gives us the same sort of distance from the sides as we do the top, and it's kind of a nice look that way. It gives us enough room to put our text up top, which is what we'll do next. In our library, we have several different letters that when we arrange them, they're going to spell out addition math facts up here on the top of our line here. So we'll start by bringing out the A. And what we see here is this A is also much larger than we need it to be. So we're going to, instead of 640 by 640, we just need it to be 60. So I change one of those values to 60, and because we have it checked to constrain proportions, the other height will also go to 60 as well. The second thing we need to do to the letters is, you see that it's black, and we need to change that to white so that it looks like it's chalk on the board here, and it'll be easier to read. So in our Style tab here, I'll select Edit Image and just simply invert color and click OK, and that'll give it that look that we're looking for. And now we can drag that up here above our line. You can spend as much time or as little time as you want kind of nudging things into place however you would like that to look above there. And I'm going to do the same thing with the rest of the letters, again, to spell addition, math, facts across the top. So I'll go to my D next, drag out the D. In my Properties panel, I'm going to edit that image, invert the color, and select OK. Then I'm going to change the size to 60. And you can do this in whichever order you want. I tend to alternate because that's where the Properties panel sort of left off. Now I need another D, so I'll just go Control D to duplicate this, and now I've got another one side by side there. Continuing to spell addition, I'm going to bring out an I next. Properties panel, I've got this. I'll set it to 60, then go to Style and invert that color. Drag it up here to the bar with the others. And next I'm going to need a T. So let's bring... Okay, so now again you can spend as much or as little time as you want kind of making this look nice. Maybe center it up here a little bit better, but that's pretty close. That's a good start here. Now we're ready to bring the equation into the mix here. So we've got a bunch of tiles with numbers on them that are pre-made up to be pulled out and changed. We're going to have two numbers. We'll have our first number and our second number. Each of those two objects is going to have multiple states to represent the different numbered tiles that we have, and there's going to be a total of 15 number tiles. So in the addition, it's possible to add two numbers, 1 and 1 to equal 2, or 15 and 15 to 30, and anything else in between in some combination. So let's begin by creating a square here on the stage, and we're going to set the size of this to 90 by 90. There we go. And we'll just, right now, we'll just kind of position it off to the side here a little bit. And we're going to go ahead, let's give this a color. The tiles, the number tiles are sort of a blue color that matches this stripe up here. So we'll make the color of our box. This will be our normal state, which will be an empty box with no number value in it at all. We're going to go ahead and create the color for this. I've got that selected right there. Now this value is 51 Alpha 9 Charlie Delta, or RGB 81 169 205. So you can match that color exactly as I have it here. Now what we'll do is we're going to go into the state view. Again, this is our normal look, and we're going to go ahead and duplicate this. And here is where we want to pay very close attention. I'm going to name the state num1 for number 1. So the number 1 tile is going to go into this particular box, okay? But the naming is really, really important, because we'll end up using the specific name in conjunction with our random number variables to create the name of this so that it's properly displayed each time we create a new problem for folks. So with number 1 selected here, what we're going to do is change from a solid fill to an image fill. And then under the fill drop down, we'll go to our folder. And because we've already imported all of the objects from our images, we'll select the tile number 1, so we see how that looks. We'll hit OK, and then OK again here. And you'll see that this first one, it's a little larger than our box, so we're going to shrink that up, but we'll go to the fill and uncheck the box that says tile, and then it automatically just scales to fit that box the way we need it to. All right, so now let's duplicate this, and we're going to say num2. And then we're going to simply change by going to the folder here and selecting tile number 2. And when I hit OK and OK, we don't have to do any extra work. It's automatically sized to match. And so we're going to go ahead and repeat this process for all 15 number tiles. So we'll change this to num3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just create all the states, and then I'll go back and change out the tiles because I think that's going to be a little bit faster. I already did num3, so num4. And all right, so we have all of our number tiles in place here. And so let's go ahead now and change out the actual number values. And so this is going to be number 3. So we're just going to go over to the fill, and we're going to select our folder and select tile 3 and hit OK and OK. And now that's in place. Now we'll go here. This will go to number 4. Select that. All right, so we've got all of our number tiles for the states for the first number in place. Let's go ahead and rename this first number. Notice the camel casing. First, all lowercase, then capital N number. First number. Now the nice thing is, because I went through the trouble of putting all the states in 1 through 15 for this, when I duplicate with Control D, my duplicated state has all of those states in it, my object. So when I look at this now in the state view, all of these are done already. So I really only have to do it once. It seems like a lot of work, but I only have to do it one time. And then now every time I duplicate, it's exactly what I need it to be. Okay, let's change the name of this from first number _ 2 to second number. All right, now I'm going to need a text entry box. We'll go ahead and get rid of that submit button, highlight it and delete, and we'll use our text entry box here. Let's make this be the same size as our 2 number tiles here. Because these don't match, the width and the height, we'll have to uncheck the constrained proportions. And then we'll go 90 by 90. And then we'll put this on the same line here as the other boxes. There we go. Now I need to finish out the equation with our symbols. So we need a plus sign here and then an equal sign here. We'll find those in the library. Let's find that plus. There it is. We'll drag that out and then place it in between here. Try to center it as best as we can. And then I've got an equal sign that we'll bring out, and we'll place that one just about halfway in between those. That's pretty close. Now what I'm going to do here, just for aesthetic purposes, I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to make sure they're the same distance apart. Then I'm going to group them with Control G. And then I'm going to center the entire group on the stage. So now that is right where I need it to be. Something left here with my text entry box. We'll get that selected. I'm just going to go ahead and we'll set this for a nice large font. And we'll set that font for the letter itself to be the blue color, so it matches everything else. There we go. All right, so finally we need a couple of buttons here for the functionality. Let's do a couple rounded rectangles for that. And we'll need a begin button down here. And let's type begin on that button. And let's make these match our color scheme here. We'll make the text white because that's going to show up a little nicer on there. And let's use our margin to nudge that down a little. Let's go 5. That's a little more centered now. We'll duplicate that button, and we'll make this one say check answer. And we're going to have to make that a little bit smaller text so it fits. Let's go 16. Let's see how that looks. There we go, but we don't need to go so far down with the margins. Let's try 2. That looks okay. All right, so let's make this a button. And we'll do check answer, and let's make that a button. All right, so we got 2 buttons there. We got a few things left to set up on the stage. We've got a few text boxes, and then we also have a variable display that we need to set up here because we're going to have a timer. So we want to have that timer in place as well. But we're going to need 3 text boxes that have static text. We're going to need a couple of text boxes that display variables for us, and then 1 text box that is going to be shown and hidden at various times. So let's take a look at our 3 static text boxes. So I'm going to start by, we'll just create a box out here. And the text in this box is going to say that you have 60 seconds. So you have 60 seconds. And you know what? We're going to make this a bit bigger so that it fills that box up. So let's try 36. That's really big. That's okay. Let's for fun, let's change up the font here too. Let's go with the Courier New, and we're going to change that text color to white, and we're going to make it bold. And then what we'll do is we're going to take the opacity down to 0, and we're going to take away the border width on that box as well. So now it just looks like text on the chalkboard. All right, so we need another one that says how many can you answer. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and duplicate this one. So we'll highlight it and do a Control D, and we'll drag that one over to this side, and there, we'll line it up on that. We'll line this one up on the right on the edge of the stripe that we have on both sides. And then we just need to change the text here. So it says, how many can you answer? So how many can you answer? All right, so we need a third text box that's going to go down here in this space to be a label for the score that the student has. So we can make a small box down here in this space. There we go. And let's make sure our text is black. And we'll say this is our score. Let's nudge that over to the side there. And again, we'll take the stroke down to 0 and the opacity down to 0. So that's our label for the score that's going to be displayed down here. We could maybe make that a little bigger. Let's go 24. All right. And then I always like to have it centered in here. Even though this here says it's centered, there's something about the padding that doesn't line up quite right. So I always like to adjust this a little bit. Let's give that a 5. That looks like it's more centered now. Okay, so those are our 3 static text boxes. In other words, the text, it never changes. Nothing's ever going to be different with this. All right, so now let's go and make our two variable holders. We need one in the center here that's going to serve as our countdown timer. So let's go ahead and draw a box here. And our text, this is going to, so it'll be double dollar signs, and then our variable, we're going to use a variable called timer because that's what it is. And I'm going to make this big and red. So let's make a nice red color for that. And let's make this really big, like a 72 here. All right, and we'll see how that looks when we preview the project. We'll see how that displays there. Let's bold that, make it look a little fatter. All right, and then we're going to get rid of the surrounding box, so we'll go opacity 0 and the width of 0 on the border. So now it's just going to be some numbers right there in the middle, and we can play around with the positioning on that too. And I decided let's stretch this out just a little bit here so that the text is just on 2 lines instead of 3. I think that is going to, yeah, I think that looks better. Okay, now I need another variable box. Let's duplicate this one. And we'll bring this down here for the score, because I want the score to be in red also. We're just not going to have it be quite as large. I'm going to size this to fit the space. And let's shrink this up down here. That's maybe too small. Let's go 18. Let's go back to 20. That's pretty close. We can adjust it if we want to. And this is going to be score. So S-C-O-R-E, that's our score variable. That's going to go there. And now finally we have one more piece that we want to put together, and that is our box that displays in the center. That's going to be hidden. And that's going to run right across the center here. So let's grab another shape. We'll go right across here. All right, and this box here is going to say time is up, click begin to try again. So let's get that in there. Time is up, click begin to try again. And I think what we'll do, let's have this match the courier new, and let's bold that, and let's have that be our blue color, and we'll get rid of the box surrounding, so we'll go opacity 0 and 0 on the stroke, and we'll just bring it down a little bit so it's a little more centered between our timer and our equation there. Alright, so this, because we want to hide this and show this at various points, so when the game is over, when the timer runs down, we want to make this show up. So the player knows, oh, time is up. And that they have an instruction. If they want to play again, they can hit that begin button. So we want to give this a name because we know we're going to be addressing it. So we're just going to call it time's up. Notice the camel casing, lowercase t, and then uppercase U. There we go. So now our board is complete. Everything is on the stage where we would like it to be. Let's go ahead and do some more naming. Let's get our begin button. Let's have a name for that. we'll just call it begin button. So begin, and then I do capital B, and then TN for begin button. And over here for the check answer, let's do check, CHECK, and then ANS for check answer, because that's exactly what it's going to do for us, and that gets those going. Now, a couple more things to set up for our project here is we're going to make a few variables on the Captivate side. So let's go up to project, and we're going to need 4 different variables. We see that the text entry box created a variable for us, but we're not going to use that one. I much prefer to give a name to the variable that represents exactly what it is as much as I can. And that text entry box is for the answer, the response that the student gives. And so I'm going to create a variable called my response. And that value I'll set as a default 0. And we'll save that. We're going to need a variable for the score that we put down here to keep track of how many the student gets right. So we're going to have one called score, which will default to 0, and we'll save that. We're going to add another new one. We're going to need a variable to store the actual answer. So we have one for the response of the student, but then we need one to store the correct answer. And so we'll just call that answer. And by default, we'll set that to 0 as well. And we'll hit save there. And we have one final variable that we need to create. And this one's going to be for the timer. This is what's going to count down from 60 to 0 for us, and we'll go ahead and call that variable timer. The default value here, though, is going to be 60, because we're going to give them 60 seconds to go ahead and work on this. And so we'll save that. Now we have those 4 here, and we'll hit close. Now that I've done that, I'm going to come back to my text entry box, and we see that variable is associated to text entry box 1, but I'm going to change that so that it's associated to my response. So now that I've got those variables in place, we're ready to start working on some JavaScript. Let's get started with that, because this is the part we've been waiting for, right? So there's 3 different places that we need to put some JavaScript, some activity, some action. And that's going to be the begin button, because when we click on this, things need to happen. And the check answer button, because when we click on that, things need to happen. And then we also are going to use the on enter. So when this pops up as an activity, as soon as we enter the slide, we're going to put some things into place that will help facilitate the game. And it's important to remember the concept of pseudocode. We talked about this a little bit already in the first part when we looked at some of the language and worked through some examples, and we're going to use a lot of those examples here. But we've got a lot more pseudocode to think about and remember here. So let's start just sort of thinking about the overall activity. What is it that we sort of expect to happen as a whole? Right? So we want the student to click begin to start the game, and that's going to get that timer going. Now the student is going to be presented with a brand new problem, so 2 numbers are going to pop up, and then they're going to type that answer in to the text entry box and hit the check answer button. That's going to see if they got it right or not, and if they got it right, their score is going to go up. If they get it wrong, the score will not go up, but they'll go ahead and get a new problem anyway. So they're going to keep on going through this. And when the time runs out, then nobody gets to submit any more answers to the problems. Game is over. And so they have to hit begin to try again, as the message there shows for us. So we want that to pop up at the end. So let's take a look at the very first sort of thing that happens with our begin button. And the first part here is that we want to be able to see the countdown timer start. Secondly, we need to present a problem for the student to solve. And then we're going to want to disable that begin button, because we don't want students to just sit there and hit begin, 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 begin. So we want to disable the button. Once they start the game, they don't get to restart the game in the middle of the game. So that button becomes inactive for a little bit. And then we're also going to set the current score to 0. Now by default it is 0, but we know that if they play a game, they're going to have a score. And so when they hit begin to start a new game, that score needs to be reset to 0. So we're going to make sure that that happens on our begin button. We're also going to need to hide, so we have that little message there that says time is up. Click begin to try again. By default, on the very first time, they're not going to see that. It's going to be hidden. But when it does pop up at the end of the first game, we want to hide it again while the next subsequent games are being played. So we'll make sure that that happens. And then finally, we want to show or enable the check answer button, because by default, that check answer button doesn't work until we start the game. So we're not busy checking answers, creating new problems, and that sort of thing. We make sure that doesn't work to begin with. And that's everything our begin button should need to do. Now, 2 of these things are big functions, and 4 of these things are going to be simple statements. So let's take a look at how these are going to work. Our 2 big functions are going to be getting that timer going and creating a new problem to present to the students. So if we remember how to get to our JavaScript window, we're going to click that button. It says Use As button. We'll go to our Actions tab, and on success, we'll set that to Execute JavaScript. Let's go ahead and deselect the Continue Playing the Project, and then go ahead and enter that script window. So we got a blank slate here to work with. All right, so looking down that list on our pseudocode, what do we need it to do? We need to start the countdown timer. That's going to be a function, but we're going to call it countdown. So if I create my countdown function, this is how I'm going to call that function. I simply call out the name of the function with my open and close parentheses and the semicolon to close it. That calls the countdown timer. I'm also going to want to present a new problem to the student, and that's also going to be a function. So we'll call that one new problem, open and close parentheses, and a semicolon. Okay, so notice I got my camel casing here. So those are 2. That takes care of the first 2 things in our list. Now we need to disable the button itself. So go back to our first part, and we did cp.disable. So cp.disable, and you can use that reference guide as well. And we're going to disable itself, and we called it begin button. So we're going to do our open parentheses, open quote, type in the name, begin btn, close our quote and parenthesis, and our semicolon to stop. So now we've done that. That's our 3rd part. Now the 4th part, we're going to set the score to 0. So here we simply assign the value 0 to the variable score. So we just say score equals 0, semicolon. Now we got 4 of the 6 things done. Number 5, we need to hide the box that says time's up. We're going to make that go away. So remember to hide an object. We got cp.hide, and what are we hiding? The time's up object. I got 2 M's in there. Let's take care of that. All right. If I misspell it, it's not going to work. We have one last thing in here. Our 4th just sort of simple statement that we're going to do is to show or enable the check answer button. Now we did a disable for the begin button. So let's do a show hide on the check answer. So let's do cp.show check ANS, capital A, and that's it. So that should be all the code we need for the begin button, because we've addressed all the pseudocode parts. What do we want to have happen? And then we just run down that list and make sure that we have those things in place. Now we haven't made these functions yet. We'll put those in the onEnter portion, and so we'll specifically look at what does the countdown timer need to do and what does the new problem need to do, so that when we create the function we'll be able to address that as well. So let's hit OK here, and let's take a look at the check answer button. Let's go on success, execute JavaScript, deselect the continue playing box, and we'll open that window. So here we have a few more things. So what needs to actually happen when we check the answer? Well, we need to compare the response that the student gives to what the correct answer actually is, and then we have to make a decision. So if the answer matches the correct answer, then what are we going to do? We're going to increase their score and give them a new problem. But if the answer doesn't match the correct answer, then we're not going to do anything. We're not going to give them a score, but we are going to go ahead and give a new problem, but without incrementing their score. That's all we need to do here. So let's look through each of these things together. So the first part was to say we need to compare the student response to the correct answer. So this is a conditional. This is where we're going to use an if statement. So we say if the response, remember we called that my response, is equal to the answer. Remember we said correct answer was just the answer. So if the response equals the answer, well, that's good news. So we would put our open and closing curly brace. We're going to increase their score. So plus plus score. It'll go up by 1. They got one more correct. That actually takes care of the first two items on our list where we needed to compare the answer and, if it matches, increase their score. But if it doesn't match, we're not going to increase their score. But whether it matches or not, we're going to give them a new problem anyway. So we'll just go ahead and call that new problem function. And that's it. That's all we need for the check answer. Because if it doesn't match, right? So if it matches, give a score. There's nothing else written. It's not going to do anything else. So if the conditions above are false, nothing else happens there, and then they just get a new problem presented to them. So that's it there. Now let's go to the onEnter. So if I click somewhere in my scrap area, I'll be presented with the slide options, and so now I see onEnter. And so I'm going to change this to say execute JavaScript, deselect continue playing the project, and we'll open our script window here. So now we have these are the big functions. We've got two functions to make in here. One is for the timer, and there's a few different ways that we can go about creating timers. And then we also have the generation of a new problem. Let's go ahead and start with the new problem. And the function here, in order to create this, we start by declaring that there's a function available. So I type out the word function, and then I follow that up with the name I'd like to give the function. So in this case, we selected new problem. And so I'm going to go ahead and select new problem, put that open and closing curly or parenthesis there, and then I have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. So everything, whenever we say, okay, new problem, that function runs, everything in between the curly braces should happen. And so what do we need to have happen? What do we expect out of the new problem function. So this is our pseudocode for the function. So let's think this through a little bit. Well, first of all, I need to make sure that I get a random number selected for our first number and our second number. Once I have those two numbers, I want to make sure that the correct answer is properly calculated and stored in our variable. I want to make sure that my two number tiles on the display are updated to reflect the two random numbers that were chosen. And then finally, this isn't a requirement, but it's a nice gesture, I guess you could say, that we clear out the text entry box of the previous answer so that the student can simply type in the new answer without having to delete the old answer out first. That'll help them with their time so that they don't have to waste time doing that portion of it. Okay, so let's take a look at each of these things in turn. So the first thing we said is we need to make sure that we have a random number selected for each of our two tiles, the two numbers that are going to be added together. So in my function here, I'm actually going to use two more variables. These are two variables that I did not create in Captivate globally. I'm just going to use them right here within this function. So I can just create them here. And so I'm going to say that value number 1, this will be the first random number that gets assigned to the first number in our equation. So the value number 1 is equal to, remember how we created a random number? It's going to be math, capital M, dot floor, so that we get a nice whole number and not a decimal value. And then parentheses math.random, so this is where we actually grab that random number. And then we're going to multiply that value by 15 because we got number tiles going up to 15. So we're going to multiply by 15, and then we're going to add 1 to that value because when I do times 15, remember that'll give me from 0 to 14 actually. So by adding 1 to the end, then I get 1 to 15. And we're going to do that exact same thing for value number 2. So value number 2 is equal to math.floor and then math.random, open and closing parentheses, and we'll go times 15 and plus 1. And we'll close that out there. All right, we'll just space that right so it looks the same. Okay, that takes care of my two number values, the two randomly generated numbers. So we have that. Now we want to make sure that the answer is calculated. So what is the answer to our addition facts? Well, the answer is equal to the first value plus the second value. So value 1 plus value 2. That's the correct answer. So we let we let our browser, we let the JavaScript figure that out. And the real question is whether or not the student's response is equal to that. Next, I want to make sure that my number tiles change their states to match the random numbers that are selected. So remember, we named all these very specifically, num1, num2, num3, etc., all the way up to num15. And so in this part of the JavaScript, we're going to combine the changing state commands, but we're going to throw our variables in there as a way to concatenate the names so that they match up with our variables. And this becomes a real powerful way to randomly grab a state that you have available. And so this is going to be cp.changeState. So we remember that. You can look back to the quick start guide. That'll help, the reference guide on the JavaScript. And remember, we have to tell it the name of the object and then the name of the state. So the name of our object is going to be the first number. Remember, we named that first tile first number. And the name of the state is num and some number, right? It's num1 or up to num15. It could be any of them. Well, where does that number come from? Right here, value 1 and value 2. So if I say num plus value 1, that gives me the value that's going to be appended. So if the random value 1 number is, let's say, 8, then the name here becomes num plus 8 or num8. It just puts them together. So it actually matches the name of the state that we gave it. That's what makes this so powerful. So we'll do this again. cp.change state for the second number. And that's also going to be num and plus, but we'll do value 2 this time. And we'll close that out. Okay, so now we've got our function is coming together. We've got our random number generated. We've got the answer generated. We've changed the state name. And now sort of the nice thing that we were going to do is go ahead and clear out the entry field. And so what we can do here is let's close this quick. Let's give this a name. We're going to give our text entry box a name. Let's call it the response tab. So we'll say response TB, like that. We'll call it response tab. And so now what we can do is address that named field. And this is going to be a little bit trickier. This isn't covered in our reference guide, but this is a really powerful method of working with some JavaScript. And so we're going to call upon this response tab, like this here, and the input field part of it. So response tab underscore input field. So this part says go find this thing called response tab. We'll address the input field part of it, and we're going to set the value of that input field. And I'm just going to put double quotes with nothing in there, so that basically whatever was there is now nothing, just nothing in between there. So that takes care of our new problem function. We've got another function to take care of here. That's our countdown function. So again, we'll declare this the exact same way. So we'll call it a function, and we'll count down, put our open and closing parentheses, and then our open and closing curly brace, and then everything in the middle is going to happen when that is called. Now there's a number of different ways that folks can use or create the timer, and in this case I chose to use a set timeout sort of methodology of doing it. And so we're going to put inside the function a set timeout function as well. And so it's almost like a function within a function. So we'll do set timeout. And the way we do this is in the reference guide, so you can look to see how the set timeout is built. And so this timeout takes two things. It takes a function and a particular amount of time. So the first part is the function. So we'll call a function, put our open and closing there, and our curly brace. Now I'm going to have a closing curly brace for that function. And then after that, I got my comma and the amount of time. Well, I want my timer to be 60 seconds. So I want everything within my set timeout to happen every single second. And the value that is being requested here is in milliseconds. So if I put 1,000 milliseconds, that's the equivalent of 1 second. And then I'm going to close this out. So now everything in between here, so every time the countdown function is called, it's going to run the set timeout. And whatever's in between here will happen 1 second later. So function countdown is called. 1 second later, everything in here is called. So what happens every single second? Well, I want to actually check some things. So I'm going to put an if statement in here. I want to say, well, if my timer, because I need my timer to be working, if my timer is greater than 0, that means my timer is still running. I'm not done yet. If it's greater than 0, opening, closing curly brace, then minus minus timer. We'll go ahead and decrease that timer by 1. So remember, we started at 60. So when this runs the first time, it says if timer greater than 0. Oh, that's true. Timer is equal to 60. What are we going to do? Decrease by 1. Now it's 59. Well, once that happens, we need to check the countdown again. So let's call the function. It's going to call itself. And so when countdown is called again, in a second later, it checks the count. Oh, it's 59. Go ahead, decrease the timer by 1. Now it's 58. Run countdown again. And so that part will repeat over and over until it gets to 0. Because when timer is no longer greater to 0, greater than that means it is 0. All right, so we get down to 0. So now timer is not greater than 0. False. Now what? That's our else statement. So when timer isn't 0, we're going to do something else. And what happens else is everything else inside our setup that we needed to have happen. So what else happens now? What happens when the timer reaches 0? Right? This is our pseudocode. What has to happen? Well, we want to hide that check answer button because we're not inputting and checking anything anymore. Game is over. So we're going to hide that. Because remember, we showed it on the begin button. So now we're going to hide it. We'll get rid of it. And then we're going to enable the begin button. We want to make that active again so that the student can start a new game. We also want to show that time's up message so that the student sees that and they realize, oh, time was up. And then finally, we want to reset that timer back to 60 again so that when they hit begin, it can start going down from 60. So let's build those 4 things into our else statement. So first of all, we're going to hide the check answer. So cp.hide, remember that? And the name of our object is check answer, ANS. And we're going to close that out. So that hides that check answer button. Now we're going to enable cp.enable the begin button. So that was begin, btn, close quote, close parenthesis, and semicolon. Then we're going to show that time's up message. So cp.show and time's up. And then finally, we're going to set that timer back to 0, or to 60. So timer equals 60. Close that out. So that now becomes our else statement. Now, remember, every second, these are being looked at. And else only runs when timer is 0. Because as long as timer is greater than 0, just this goes. This is only for the false condition. And so that should take care of everything we need on this particular part. So, well, let's take a look. Let's see, we put all that stuff together. Let's see how we did. Let's see how this looks. We need to make this hidden by default so that it doesn't show up when we first start. All right, let's preview. We'll cross our fingers. Here we go. And we hit begin. There's our 2 numbers come up. Our timer is counting down. I put in my answer 12. That looks okay. Check the answer. It's correct, so my score went up. This is 21. Check the answer. Score goes up. Let's put in a wrong answer. Let's put in 5. Check the answer. Score did not go up. We got a new problem. Let's put in 10. Another wrong answer. Still didn't go up. All right, so let's go 4. Check the answer. Score went up. 13, check the answer, score went up. 18, check the answer, score goes up. 20, check the answer, score goes up. 24, check the answer, score goes up. 16, check the answer. Let's do another bad one. Let's do 10, no go up. Let's do 8, no go up. Time is up. So now, I can't submit anymore. I could try to type it in, but I have no way of submitting that. Time's up, click to begin. I got a score of 8. So if I want to try again, I'll hit begin. Score is reset. Timer is going down again. My check answer comes up. I don't get to hit begin. Let's put in 15, check my answer, and I'm good to go. All right, that worked out pretty well. So let's go back to here. Now hopefully we get a chance to sort of see how all this JavaScript goes together. It's quite a bit involved here, but you can see the power of this in creating, like the timers and stopping and starting other things based on the values of these things, changing out these states to match the numbers that are randomly drawn by JavaScript. So at this point, happy to entertain any questions that you might have. Feel free to reply or post your questions in the comments. If you're watching this video, please do send your questions out there. You can reach me at the Adobe forums in the e-learning community, and I'm happy to help answer any questions that you might have. Again, thanks so much for spending time with me today and working through this project. It was a lot to work through, but hopefully you gained a little something from the experience. Have a great day.